let's break down our must-start defenses and streams for Week 14 of the fantasy season. These are the defenses that you have to start this week if you want to absolutely dominate your league mates. All right, let's kick the video off with the Jacksonville Jaguars. 16 fantasy points in Week 13. Very solid outing. Allowed just 3 points against the Tennessee Titans. Had 3 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and a fumble recovery. Only 188 total yards allowed. They are a top 10 fantasy defense. We talked a lot about them going into Week 13. They did shoot up to 68% rostered, but still a team that might be out there and available for you guys to stream. This has been an extremely opportunistic defense so far on the season. 13 interceptions. I mean, this is a defense that will cause turnovers. And yeah, this is a big matchup this week at home against the Colts. The Jaguars right now atop of this division in the AFC South, taking it away from the Colts with that loss to the Texans that the Colts had this past week. And so this is a big game. I think that the Jaguars will come up big in this game defensively. I know a lot of people looking, at this matchup and maybe they're not going to like it. You might even see the Jags get dropped in your respective league. But when we look at that Colts offense, it has been struggling in the past 2 weeks. We know that Daniel Jones is playing through an injury right now, and he has still been pretty sharp. Don't get me wrong. No turnovers in the past 2 weeks. Had a fumble this past week, but it was not a lost fumble. But outside of that, 4 passing touchdowns, 0 interceptions. But if we look over the past 4 games, he still has a total of 4 interceptions and 7 fumbles, 3 of them lost. So there is an opportunity for turnovers here for the Jaguars defense. And this is, once again, as opportunistic as a defense as you're going to find. So I think they're still in the streaming realm here in Week 14 of the season. I think they have a very safe floor and they still present some nice upside in a big divisional matchup. Next up, we have the Washington Commanders, a true streaming option here in Week 14. They sit at just 12% roster. Now, as always, I do have to record these videos before Sunday Night Football has been played, and I'm not really expecting the Washington Commanders defense, honestly, one of the worst defenses in the league, to have a good performance against the Broncos on Sunday Night Football. But, even with them being the defense 29 in fantasy, averaging 4.8 fantasy points per game, if they're going to face Max Brosner and the Vikings this week, Max Brosmer, excuse me, I don't care what defense it is. This man just threw 4 interceptions and 126 passing yards in a single game. And don't get me wrong, it could be J.J. McCarthy. He could come out of concussion protocol. But once again, how much better is that since week 9 of the season and those 4 starts that we got out of J.J. McCarthy? We are looking at 3 games with 2 interceptions. That is absolutely insane. 7 interceptions in that stretch and 2 fumbles. So no matter what quarterback the Commanders are going to face here in Week 14, they're in a great spot where turnover potential will be there. So we'll see how it shakes out if McCarthy comes out of concussion protocol or not. But either way, whether it's Brosmer, whether it's McCarthy, the Commanders are a viable streaming option here in Week 14 of the season. Next up, we have the Cleveland Browns sitting at 60% rostered with just 1 fantasy point in Week 13. They really did nothing in this game. Myles Garrett had a sack. They gave up 26 points, 252 yards, and that was it. But still, we look over the past couple games, they've hit double digits in 2 of the last 4. They've hit double digits in 4 out of the last 6. So this is still a defense that provides a pretty good floor on a week-to-week basis. This is a home game for the Browns. We look on the season, 10 forced fumbles, 4 fumble recoveries, 9 interceptions, 2 defensive scores, and 42 sacks. Once again, a home game here, and they're getting Cam Ward and the Tennessee Titans. Still, I know Cam Ward has shown some life as of late. He didn't really do so in Week 13, and this is still an offense and a quarterback that we are streaming against on a regular basis. We have one game this year, one single game, where Cam Ward has not had either an interception or a fumble. That was Week 12 against the Seattle Seahawks of all defenses, but still, this past week, only 141 passing yards for Cam Ward. A fumble, it wasn't a lost fumble, but a fumble nonetheless. This is still an offense that we are streaming defenses against on a week-to-week basis. So the Browns, just 60% roster because not everybody liked that matchup this past week against the Niners. If they're out there and available, they are a must-add defense and a must-start defense here in Week 14 of the season. Next up, let's take a look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, sitting at 30% rostered. Just 7 fantasy points against the Cardinals this past week, gave up 17 total points, had 2 sacks, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery, and an interception while allowing 386 total yards. So I have talked about this Bucs defense as of late because they became kind of like a popular ad, and we'll talk about maybe more so why in a second here, but ultimately, I've also talked about how I just don't really trust this Buccaneers defense, and they were starting to look like progressively worse, at least in the secondary, week by week. But they did show some life this past week. I mean, the Cardinals really got it going in the second half of the game. That's kind of what the Cardinals do. But outside of that, I mean, the Buccaneers defense looked pretty good this past week. But, I mean, man, they're going to get the Saints and Tyler Shuck this week here in Week 14. I know Tyler Shuck showed some life this past week, but he still had an interception, still had a lost fumble. He's had a lost fumble and an interception in each of the last 2 games. And really, since he started to get snaps in Week 8, he's had an interception or lost fumble in every game except for Week 10 against Carolina. So there is turnover potential here for sure for the Buccaneers. So I think that they are a solid streaming option. Maybe not the most upside this week, but they should have a pretty good floor. And then, this is why they've been a popular ad, because they have one of the best strength of schedules for the fantasy playoffs, getting the Falcons, the Panthers, and the Dolphins. So I do think that they are worth rostering just for the overall matchups that they're going to see over the next 4 weeks. Although I don't know if you can start defenses against Bryce Young, but nonetheless here, solid matchups based on the entirety of the season. And they have a good opportunity against Tyler Shuck and company here in Week 14. All right, let's take a look at the Seattle Seahawks. 32 fantasy points against Max Brosner and the Vikings in Week 13. 4 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, a fumble recovery, 4 interceptions, a defensive score, and 162 yards allowed. That was it. They are sitting at 92% rostered, so I almost don't know why I put them in the video, because nobody's going to be able to pick them up. But if you own them, they're once again a must-start defense here in Week 14 against Captain Kirko Chains and the Falcons. Kirk Cousins, not awful this past week, 234 passing yards, a passing touchdown, no turnovers, but we did see him have 1 turnover and a fumble that was not lost, so 1 interception and the fumble that was not lost, in Week 12. So we know that there is some turnover potential there. The Seahawks will be on the road here, but I think that this is just a defense that you have to keep starting. They have been playing very good as of late. I know they really disappointed us in Week 12 against the Titans, but I think that we can stick with the Seahawks for a majority of the remainder of the season, getting the Falcons on the road here in Week 14, then getting the Colts in Week 15. I'm not going to risk them against the Rams in Week 16, although the Panthers played pretty good against that offense this past week. Too risky for me. And then they get the Panthers here in Week 17 on the road. So I think that they're still going to be a really viable starting defense for majority of the rest of the season. Not a lot to touch on here. They're coming off of a way more dominant. I thought they were going to have a great week, but I thought maybe there'd be some more talking points based off of this past week, but keep them in your starting lineups. Do not drop this defense. They're still a must start on the road against the Falcons here in Week 14. Then last but not least, I've got the Denver Broncos, once again recording this before Sunday Night Football, and I do think that they will show up against the Commanders, but you never know. They're on the road. NFL can always surprise us, but I'm expecting them to have a pretty solid outing against the Commanders coming out of their bye weekend. This has still been a top 10 fantasy defense on the year. They're averaging 8 fantasy points per game before Sunday Night Football has been played. Very highly rostered, but really regardless of what happens on Sunday Night Football, you have to keep them in your starting lineups. They have to be a must-start defense. Going into Week 14 on the road against the Raiders, Geno Smith this past week, an interception, a fumble, 165 passing yards. That was it. He's had a turnover in every game since Week 9 of the season. Every game since Week 4 of the season except for one game. And, it's just been bad. And my only concern here is that the Raiders actually turn to maybe Aiden O'Connell or Kenny Pickett. I've been saying this for a couple of weeks now, but I still don't think that's a bad thing for the Broncos defense. They're going to be a very good start against either of those quarterbacks as well. But if it continues to be Geno Smith for whatever reason in this home game for the Raiders, then the Broncos are in a great spot. And I kind of said this going into Week 13, like maybe this Chargers defense does enough that Geno Smith ends up, finally getting benched, but he did throw 2 touchdowns for what it's worth. So maybe he gets another start, and maybe this week the Broncos defense does enough to finally get Geno Smith benched. But regardless of what happens, this is a great spot for the Broncos defense, no matter what quarterback is in the lineup, and they are a must-start defense here in Week 14. All right, very quickly here, I just want to show you guys some matchups for the fantasy playoffs. You guys have seen me use this Draft Shark strength of schedule tool before, but I want to go over some of these teams that have some of the better overall remaining strengths of schedule. So we're looking at weeks 14 all the way through the fantasy championship in week 17. Let's start with the Giants. I do think the Giants are worth rostering and picking up. They have been the worst defense in fantasy football this year. They are 3% rostered. But after this week 13 Monday Night Football matchup against the Patriots and a week 14 bye week, they're going to get the Commanders, maybe with Jaden Daniels, maybe not. Maybe it's still Mariota. Whatever quarterback plays for the Vikings in week 16, then whatever quarterback plays for the Raiders in week 17. So maybe if JD5 does come back, that week 15 match, I'm not looking as strong, but they're going to have an opportunity to present some upside against the Vikings and the Raiders through the very end of the fantasy playoffs. And unless people are paying attention to this type of, these upcoming matchups, like they're not going to be rostered in your league. You can stash them, see what happens, and at worst, at least you have an upside play for the championship moments. And then we did talk about the Buccaneers, so I'm not going to break that down too much. But once again, here are the Saints, the Falcons, the Panthers, the Dolphins. They are set up for success through the fantasy playoffs. If you guys own the Texans, geez, I mean, come on, this is just unfair. The third best remaining strength of schedule. The Chiefs is a tough matchup, we know that, but then they're going to get Jacoby Brissett and the Cardinals, who can put up points, can throw the football, but also have some turnover problems. They're going to get the Raiders, and then the Chargers do show up on here as a good strength of schedule, but that kind of confuses me. But I guess, based on the data and just what we've seen, that has been true. And I mean, Herbert is a little banged up. That offensive line is banged up, so maybe there could be something there. And either way, if anyone's going to do it, it'd probably be the Texans defense. The Saints defense are the other big one. I don't like the matchup this week, so they didn't make the video against the Buccaneers, but then they're going to get the Panthers, the Jets, and the Titans. This is money right here. Now, Bryce Young has looked better. Tyrod Taylor did do some stuff this past week, but they're still good enough matchups than week 17. If you do anything whatsoever, stash the Saints for week 17 on the road against the Titans. They will show up against Cam Ward and the Titans in that matchup. Outside of that, I'm not too crazy about any of the other teams here. I like the Bills versus Cleveland there in week 16, but they're already relatively highly rostered. The Jets show up on here, and there are some good matchups here, but I just really don't trust them. I'm not going to trust this Titans defense. They did not make the video, even though they faced the Browns this week, and I do not trust them with a 10-foot pole. There's really nobody else to break down here. Maybe the Steelers, if they're out there and available, you could hold on to them to use them in the fantasy championship against the Browns. But that's really about it. If the Chiefs got dropped, they had that Tennessee matchup in week 16, so you got to like that. But really outside of that, the only other team that I would really mention is the Niners. Will get Tennessee in week 15, so they would be worth rostering and holding on to for that purpose. But outside of that, there's a look at the best remaining strength of schedules, weeks 14 through 17, some defenses that you guys can stash leading into the fantasy playoffs. And there you guys have it there, my must-start defenses and streams for week 14 of the fantasy season, plus some teams you guys can stash for the upcoming fantasy playoffs. As always, I'm answering any fantasy football questions in the comments down below. Drop me a comment. I'll get back to as many of you guys as I can throughout the week. Any fantasy football questions whatsoever that you guys have, and while you guys are down there, does me a huge favor, helps out the channel tremendously if you guys subscribe and hit that like button on the way out. When the videos and playlists pop up on the screen, don't forget, we're going to have everything that you guys could possibly need here on the channel to dominate this week of fantasy football. So go check out all of the other content this week as it drops. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.